You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelists Mario Ramos Reyes and Christopher Zender. Today we discuss euthanasia advocacy and the ethical and legal questions it raises. Richard Stith is our special and returning guest. He is a senior research professor of law at Valparaiso University. Professor Stith serves on the board of the Consistent Life Network, an organization that combats abortion, euthanasia, war, the death penalty, racism, and poverty. Let us, as always, begin in prayer. Come, O Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful, and enkindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who has taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that by the gift of the same Spirit we may be always truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Professor Stith, some argue that there should be a right to assisted suicide. And in fact, now there's a legal right to just that in California, to assisted suicide and euthanasia. What would be the basis of such a right?
Well, I think, Jim, that there are two very important and praiseworthy themes here, deeply ingrained parts of the human condition which are at work. One is the search to alleviate suffering. That's something we all share. There's no disagreement about it. We all want to alleviate suffering. And euthanasia seems to do that. Assisted suicide seems to do that sometimes. The other thing is the push for autonomy. One could say that the last few centuries, perhaps all of human history, has been an ever greater liberation and pushing back on constraints that were assumed to be natural in the past and are discovered to be unnecessary. So I think that is the other deep reason for this push. Now, those two motivations, however, are to some degree at war with each other. That is to say, if we really want to alleviate all suffering, why should we ignore the suffering of children or people who are unable to choose, people who have Alzheimer's? Shouldn't they be relieved of their suffering too? So shouldn't we ignore the question of consent or of freedom of choice in order to alleviate suffering? And the other way around, why should we be the ones to say what suffering counts? I mean, if someone has lost a job and doesn't see any future, why should we say that that person has to go on living if he or she doesn't want to? It seems that the push to eliminate constraints, to maximize freedom, is going to say that we should forget about the push even to alleviate suffering. That is to say, we should push forward even when that second motive is not available. So I think these two forces are marshaled together in order to open the door, to break the taboo against killing. We only want to give freedom of choice to those who are really suffering or in extremis. But that's just opening the door. After a while, these things are going to separate. I mean, already we see in Holland that children can be euthanized, obviously without their consent. Or there have been cases there where people who were mentally disabled were euthanized against their will, because their will didn't count anymore because they were incompetent. So, we have the mixing of these two themes, that we're only going to euthanize those where there's consent and where there is great suffering. It may be only temporary.
Yes, an internal tension. Mario, what next?
Well, Richard, you mentioned one word which caught my attention there, which is the word autonomy. When we use this word, we are already assuming a kind of, I would say, use the word naturalism. And if that then is the case, we are not including those who may have a different view. I remember clearly about C.S. Lewis saying, well, when you are saying that autonomous being, you already assuming something which is not precisely a priori knowledge, which is not part of the Christian experience or any other experience for that matter. So, and we may say, well, there are also not only autonomous being, heteronomous being also, or theonomous beings. In other words, I just decide to do what my Creator asked me to do, and so on. So my point is that what really you mean, what is the meaning that you are given to this autonomous being? What is the meaning of autonomy, with certain precision?
Well, I think, Mario, you're quite right to point out that there is no precision possible there. That is to say that, really, the people cite Kant, for example, but Kant was not in favor of arbitrary choice in any way. He wanted people to be free to follow the moral law, the categorical imperative. That was what autonomous choice was. It was following the categorical imperative. It was being moral. It wasn't doing anything you feel like. So, the notion of autonomy is really. I remember Judge Richard Posner was giving a lecture at our law school once, and he said, "Suppose a conquered nation or tribe is given the choice between slavery or death, and they choose slavery. Was that an autonomous choice?" Well, in one sense, it was. I mean, they really preferred slavery to death. But on the other hand, it wasn't an autonomous choice because the constraints were unjust. So all of our life is always constrained. And by saying, let's just leave it up to the individual to choose, we are ignoring the fact that some of those constraints could be removed. And that would change the nature. Autonomy is a small part of justice. If the constraints on choices are not themselves just, autonomy only covers up that injustice and makes it look like it's not really an injustice, because we say, well, they did whatever they wanted. They chose slavery.
Yeah.
Christopher?
I'd like to touch on what you said a bit earlier, and I wonder if this is probably not part of the problem. Now, you said we all want to eliminate all suffering. Is that really true? I mean, obviously, I don't like to suffer. Nobody likes to suffer. But given that what we are, and given our imperfection, isn't suffering necessary for perfection? I think of St. Thomas when he talks about providence. He says God's providence includes suffering, or includes evil. And he meant a wide range by the term evil, obviously, but physical evil. I think of the sufferings that bring about great art, the sufferings that bring about moral fortitude, I can't see that we would be able to achieve any of these things except through we're forced through suffering. So perhaps the problem, and one of the major problems, is that in our society we're constantly trying to escape all suffering. I mean, it's a balance. Obviously, it's a balance. We want to eliminate suffering, we want to ameliorate suffering, but at the same time we can't just, the notion that we want to just flee all suffering, I think, is part of the problem. What's your thoughts on that?
I think that is certainly true, Christopher. The problem is that I think suffering gives us a choice. Simone Weil, the great mystic writer Simone Weil, in her book Gravity and Grace, talks about this, that we can either sink or rise. That is to say, if we can overcome suffering, it may make us a better person. It can give us deep insights into art or into the human condition. But it can also make us sink, make us become more selfish, more angry at the world, more embittered. And so, I think it's not clear that suffering is always a good thing. It depends on our attitude to it. So yes, a tremendous amount would be lost without suffering, but for people who don't really see that, if they don't see the hope, they don't have that hope to be able to rise, that are more focused on the immediate losses, suffering may be primarily negative for them.
Yeah, I can see that it's true. And we talk about different degrees of suffering. Like if we take, for instance, poverty, for instance, certain forms of poverty we want to try to eliminate those because they tend to actually degrade people rather than lift them up. But I don't think we want to come to the point where there is no suffering in terms of financial life, where one does not have to restrain oneself in terms of spending, because the opposite is equally problematic. When you have no worries about money, it also has definite moral drawbacks with it. So it's kind of a balance, right? So suffering, I mean, to eliminate all suffering, I think would actually be really detrimental to the human, to the soul. But to eliminate certain kinds of suffering, yes. So we have to make those distinctions, don't you think?
Yes, there are two things we were talking about what should be and what is. Mm-hmm. I'm suggesting that there is a drive to eliminate all suffering. Mm-hmm. It's an unthinking drive. It's a mistaken drive because we're eliminating sources of great art and great insight into the human condition and so on. But I do think that is part of what's going on. Poverty, for example, is a wonderful example. But poverty, I mean, even extreme poverty, if voluntarily embraced, can be a source of great holiness. In fact, if you think of a holy person who's a spendthrift, it doesn't make sense. I mean, a holy person who just kind of, lives it up in Cancun, it doesn't, the notion of holiness seems most compatible with a life of simplicity and of few means. So and now of course that you could say, well, that's a voluntary choice. But even if it's involuntary, if one accepts that choice, if one decides, well, I don't have many means, I'm going to live within this is my way of life now, that can turn involuntary poverty into voluntary poverty. So like suffering, poverty can also be something that can uplift and can give insight. One discovers the simple things in life, the flowers and the blue sky and the stars, because one doesn't have jewels and cars to focus on. So anyway, I think I agree with you that suffering is a powerful but I just want to say poverty is also something that we can't see as totally something negative.
May I interject something there? You are saying, well, poverty. There is something wholly in poverty when you embrace. That entails you have a gift of faith. And then that's my way through which I can get to God. There is another poverty which is out there, and I really don't want, because I'm lack too many resources and I want to improve, and I don't have that gift of faith, and I want justice or fairness. There may be that some people are in this situation and say, well, I will accept that poverty, and still you're saying, well, this is voluntary. And even though the poverty at the beginning is not voluntary, but then when I accept it's voluntary. That attitude, and I have studied in Latin American history, this is what is called fatalism or stoicism, which is very common. Well, I want to deal with that. I don't know if it's beautiful or it's not. I'm not sure it's my way to holiness. I had to accept. So it seems that there are three levels. Yes, at one level, if you can say experience of faith is beautiful, then, or you can say, well, it's material lack of resources, it's another level, and then you accept, and that is more quote unquote philosophical. I have nothing to complain, but I will deal with that. But it's not good for me either. So, having said that, we are living now, it seems to me, in an age of pluralism, where all these views must be included into political body. And so we need to find some agreement. How then we are going to deal with poverty? Are we going to consider some blessing, or which one will really be the understanding? Now, my assumption is when you said, well, there is some good coming from this assisted suicide or euthanasia is the rejection of suffering. That's the baseline. Now, it seems that baseline in itself exclude certainly the idea of blessing about poverty. And so my question is how then we could accommodate these views in a society where there are at least three or many views about suffering. Now, it seems that the law today and the structure of the norm is based upon a secularist, very materialist view of suffering. But yet there are other views. But my question is how then we go about and build our society so that this norm accommodate more than one view of suffering?
Well, I think that the real rub of suffering and of poverty is not in material deprivation, but in the sense of unfairness and even worse, exploitation. Throughout human history, for most of human history, people have had far less than almost everyone has today. But that didn't lead to the kind of embitterment that you find today because people didn't perceive that, people thought of that as inevitable. If you don't have wings, you don't feel sad about not being able to fly. But if you could have wings and somebody's keeping you from having wings, by golly, you're going to feel stuck on the ground and miserable stuck down here. So anyway, I think what we need to do is to find ways to relieve that sense of unfairness or exploitation. And the capitalist idea, which worked for a long time, was that there is an impersonal randomness to poverty and to suffering caused by the market. No one is manipulating it. No one is in control of it. No one is rationing wealth. It's just impersonal market forces. So there's nobody really to blame. So some people are in the top 1%. Okay, they're lucky. I'm in the bottom. I'm unlucky. It's a matter of bad luck. But insofar as that reflects an exploitation by the 1% against the 99% or the bottom 10% or whatever, that's going to seem terribly unjust. And those who want to bring about revolution want to insist that it is unjust. So you frequently find the argument made when conservatives or others object to the rationing of health care. It's said that, well, health care is already rationed. The rich get it and the poor don't get as much or don't get as high quality. Well, see, that's saying it's not that the rationing idea implies that there's some manipulative overmind there that's discriminating on purpose against some people and not in favor of others instead of just market forces. If that mentality sinks in, of course, any kind of difference in health care between the rich and the poor is going to be resented, and we'll have to do something about it. So we, it's not that I'm particularly in favor of the market, but I do like the idea that the randomization idea that was present there, and I wish we could find, for example, in the distribution of health care, if we don't have enough health care to go around, we don't have enough vaccine, let's say, to go around, rather than saying that some people's lives are more worthy than others, let's have a random drawing. The randomization, yes, there will be some people who suffer because they don't have a vaccine, but it won't seem to be invidious suffering. It won't seem to be somebody thinks they're not worth as much as someone else. It's just drawing a number from the hat. Your number didn't happen to get drawn.
We've come a long way. We start with assisted suicide and euthanasia, which leads us to consider our understanding of autonomy and suffering. And when we think of suffering, we think of injustice. And when we think of injustice, we think of where we are dealing with injustices on a wide range of issues. But I would like to refocus us a bit here, at any rate. Everything leads to everything else, but I would like to refocus on the distinctive suffering of those who are close to death and what they could make of this suffering. In some cases, of course, and this can be appreciated even from a secular perspective, we can transcend suffering. We can come to see things that we haven't been able to see before and appreciate things that we haven't been able to appreciate before. But there comes a point for a good many people when, at that time at least, and for the foreseeable future, they can't transcend suffering. The Christian wants to see suffering as something that can be united with the suffering of our Lord Jesus Christ. But at some point, for many people, there can't be the willing to make one's own suffering united with the suffering of Jesus. At that point, what are we to say? I think we can say something, especially we can say something as Christians, but I open that up to you, Richard, and to you, Mario and Christopher. What do we say of the individual who cannot consciously transcend suffering, cannot unite his or her suffering with the suffering of Christ on the cross? What do we say to such a person? And, well, such a person isn't voting for or against euthanasia initiatives. What do we say of that terrible predicament to the great many people who fear that they will find themselves in that situation of suffering but being unable to transcend their suffering?
Well, I think, Jim, the most important thing is to say that their being, the person who is suffering, is not the evil that we want to eliminate. We want to join with them in doing our best to eliminate the suffering, and it's not just any suffering, it's really miserable suffering that you're talking about here, that no matter what they're going through, that doesn't make them worth anything less. There is, in other words, we want to appeal to the strong sense in Christianity and in the modern world of equality, that someone who is bedridden is worth just as much as someone who can walk around. It's the disability in suffering, the inability to go on with life, that is often, and the sense that therefore I am not worth as much, which is a lot of the impetus to get out of here, to die, to not be an imposition anymore. So I think we need to marshal our forces, and I do think there's hope for this among both religious people and secular people on the right and on the left, to say that your basic human dignity doesn't change. The problem is, that without that religious belief, I mean, in the old days, somebody who was a slave could say, well, I'm still equal in the eyes of God, and so slavery is really miserable, but it's, I don't lose my self-respect because I'm a child of God just as much as the king is. But of course, once that's gone, it seems like our dignity depends on what society thinks of us. And so we've got to really try to substitute, as a society, we've got to substitute the undergirding of self-respect in a way which we didn't have to before, when there was this strong belief in God to undergird self-respect.
But what do we do? I think there's another tendency, isn't there? It's not simply a lack of self-respect that might lead to something like euthanasia or the desire to take one's own life. It's also, maybe in many cases, a sign of deep self-respect. I'm thinking, for instance, like the Romans who would kill themselves. Cato didn't want to be carried in a procession of triumph under Caesar. I want to sort of appeal. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, my pagan heart in some ways understands why someone would want to avoid the indignities that are associated with many kinds of suffering. And it's because of maybe my personal pride or the sense of my own self-worth that I don't want to be put in that kind of compromising situation. I don't want to be subject to that kind of humiliation. So in that case, I think that there is a strain, at least amongst people who support euthanasia, of a sense that this is, no human being ought to live this way. And therefore every individual should have the right to be able to end his life in order that he would avoid living in this manner.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Christopher, that is the push. And the thing is that there's a paradoxical result there which will make suffering worse. That was well stated. If I may read something on, we haven't done that before on this show, but I read a little paragraph from Ezekiel Emanuel. That's the brother of Rahm Emanuel, who was the mayor of Chicago. Ezekiel Emanuel was a very prominent healthcare advisor under the Obama administration, and is still very prominent on the left. And he wrote in The Atlantic some years ago, broad legalization of physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia would have the paradoxical effect of making patients seem to be responsible for their own suffering. Rather than being seen primarily as the victims of pain and suffering caused by disease, patients would be seen as having the power to end their suffering by agreeing to an injection or taking some pills. Refusing would mean that living through the pain was the patient's decision, the patient's responsibility. Placing the blame on the patient would reduce the motivation of caregivers to provide the extra care that might be required, and would ease their guilt if the care fell short. There's an even deeper paradox spinning off from what Dr. Emanuel has said, and that's this: as the benefit that grandmother, our disabled grandmother, receives, as the benefit she receives from our care grows less because her pains and her disabilities become too difficult to overcome. As she nears death or becomes more laden with pains, her seeming selfishness increases. That is to say, she's insisting that we give her more and more care to less and less effect. By golly, I mean, she's using up all the kids' college money to get very little for herself. And eventually, at some point, we as outside observers, and this is something that's been documented many times, that non-disabled people frequently say, I could never live that way. But disabled people say, no, overwhelmingly, my life is still worth living, because they discover these things that make it still worth living. The little things that we non-disabled people don't see, they see, and still gives meaning to their lives. So, but we as external observers are going to say, oh my gosh, she's getting no benefit out of her life, but she's still selfishly imposing on the rest of us. But now it's not just selfishness, it's irrationality. She's a fool. She's just causing her own self pain. We should relieve her of this wrongly burdening of herself. So there's going to be this pressure. And if she goes on and still resists assisted suicide, people telling her, despite people telling her you're crazy not to take this easy way out, look how much you're suffering. If she goes on and resists, she's going to die with feeling that those people around her have lost sympathy with her, that she's a selfish person, and she's going to feel guilty about having taken the kids' college money or the grandkids' college money. So we are going to actually, the legalization of assisted suicide increases the suffering, the psychological suffering, the deepest kind of suffering of those who choose to reject it.
But if you mentioned another word for the first time, I think I'm curious to know what you think. You use the word pain. Because before we were talking about suffering. Now it's pain. I think there is a difference. And it seems to me that what is happening with our analysis is what is happening to the analysis of what we call Christian Democratic Party. That is, that we can talk a lot about dissecting arguments, setting policies, more fair, more just, and things of that nature, without addressing, I think, the fundamental topic here, which is how we as a community get to that point of fairness. Fairness in law is not going to come out of nowhere. It is going to come up out of a community. So why then people don't want to suffer? Because people are not loved. It's simple. And if people are not loved, it's because we, in singular, do not love. And so why then people, today we don't have a Christian Democratic Party? Because there is no really a community which is nurturing this party. In other words, we fall into the trap of believing, I'm including Christian here and Catholic, systems of healthcare and principles and bioethical principles and the like, start discussing this argument without realizing this argument only really would be living argument if there is a community. So when you say, well, Yes, I don't want really to spend all the money of my grandkids. Well, right there is an issue there that we don't know what that love in the family is in the first place. In other words, we are suffering in ourselves a huge impact of secularism. And we try to solve with arguments, which may be true. There's no question about that. But then, and I think in that sense, I think the intuition, the pastoral intuition of Pope Francis is sometimes misunderstood. Everything begins with mercy, but mercy is not an abstract principle. It's not something that I can define and then explain. No, it begins with my neighbor in the other side of my street. That when he's really suffering pain, well, he's waiting for someone to care for him. If we don't begin with this awareness and sense that we are poor in the ontological sense, that we need somebody. I'm not saying, well, we need Christ. No, we need somebody who mediate this affection. And that is what is broken today. I think that our society is broken in that sense. We talk a lot about solidarity, but solidarity is a system. I help, I have my food bank, but people need sense of touch. And in that sense, we don't like that. We don't want, not even because of the pandemic, we don't take distance. Very often, before that, it's very hard to get in touch with people. There's some formality. And I think is key. I don't know. It's not a question. It's just a reflection about this distinction sometimes that we make about pain and suffering.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Mario, to call attention to that distinction. I would say that the problem of pain, literal physical pain, is largely overcome. I taught for a year in medical school and was assured by all the physicians there that if worse comes to worse, you can cut the nerve connection to the painful leg. So pain, physical pain, is not our problem, but it's rather psychological suffering, which is primarily related to lack of love and disability. That is our problem. So, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the fact that we have put our old folks in nursing homes now instead of keeping them in the family is a dam that's waiting to break. People obviously don't want them around. If there were a cheaper way to not have them around by a painless exit of killing, a lot of nursing home rooms would be emptied out. How many people would, if the euthanasia of animals were not permitted, how many people would how many people put their animals, their pets, into kennels rather than killing them if they become disabled? It's got to be a tiny handful, because when that option's available, that seems to be the most sensible, the cheaper, the nice thing to do. Well, if that dam breaks and the same option that's available for people as is now available for pets is available, people are going to shut down nursing homes just like kennels. There'll just be a few around for temporary care, but not for long-term care. So I think we do have to. I think by holding the line on killing, though, we force people to look at the conditions of nursing homes. We force people to look at the harm that is done by substituting personal care with professional care, because the artificial smile of a nurse or a nursing home attendant is not the same as the smile of a child or a sister or brother caring for you. So I think it's not having that easy way out is what keeps the pressure on us to be better people, to do something about the lack of, as you point out, it's not, the government is not a substitute for touch. We need someone who is close to us, who we feel bound to be touching and caring for us. And that's what we have to recover.
Just one comment, Richard. You visited Paraguay. There is an experience in Paraguay which is unique. So unique that was the only place that the Pope Francis visited when he went to South America. The only private, quote unquote, enterprise or proposal, if you will. And that is a clinic, which were built, in a parish in Asunción. The parish is called San Rafael. And the priest who is running for many, many years, Aldo Trento, an Italian priest, is unique. I think is the Mother Teresa of the 21st century. Right there, you have behind, in the parish, you have a clinic of people who are dying. And he picked up these people from the street. And when you go there, because I worked with him a few times in journalism, when you go there, it seems that heaven and earth are there. And people are dying joyfully. Now, what is the point there? In the same parish, you have a high school. You have elementary school. You have people around. And then people dying. And so you can see people who, there are funerals at the same time. Kids are playing in the backyard. So reality is one there. So some people who are shaped by modern way of living say, hey, you shouldn't show this funeral to these kids. They are playing here in the elementary school. But the point is, well, but death and suffering, when it's meaningful, has a unity. And so people are learning, like small city, that everything is interwoven. And so there is a joyful in sickness, joyful in death, in learning, in everything. It's unique. So much so you get there, I cannot explain, use argumentative. It's just an experience. You say, that's what is called the Jesuit missions. That is unique. Now, is the government which is running this? No. That is what is called technically subsidiarity. We are the one who are close to the people. And we are building, you can use this term, a Catholic city. It's unique. Now, if you go outside, you are going to start looking at modernity. We divide people. Well, hospital, for senior living houses. And then that's funeral is far away. And so we divide everything because we try to instill our own individuality, autonomy. But if we do that, we are missing what? What is the human experience, that we are social beings. And I think, to me, was a lesson how to, what we call, rebuild civilization without any political project. And I think to me, it's incredible. Again, Pope Francis, when he go there, the only place he want to go and see with his eyes. And I think it's, in terms of the meaning of life at the end, people are suffering. People are suffering physically, and people who are completely discarded because people are being picked up on the streets. I think is unique.
Well, that is an inspiring experience there, an example. I think, there's a lot that goes into that, though, Mario. The Catholic ethos there that surrounds having children in a playground next to a funeral home, is a wonderful thing, that integration. But I think of Aldous Huxley's 1984, which used proximity to death for the opposite purpose, to make us more hard-hearted. The children were encouraged to go and eat ice cream cones next to somebody's while they were dying, and to be licking the ice cream cones and just kind of treating death as a trivial thing, so they wouldn't be have any qualms about killing or being killed in the future. So I think that is inspiring, and that is kind of an ideal we would want to work for, but it takes more than work. It's even if we reintegrated nursing homes into daily life more, that wouldn't necessarily by itself solve the problem. We might be more just like Aldous Huxley argued.
Let me look at this from all our perspectives. And I'll begin with something that the well-known ethicist Gilbert Mylander said. He said, "I want to be a burden to my children." And there are a lot of angles on that that we could pursue. I guess Mario's proposal that we visit this marvelous place in Paraguay is certainly instructive. There remains the question, as Richard has noted, of how there has to be not just that kind of marvelous mission village, but there has to be the surrounding ethos. Otherwise, we're left with Huxley's grim conditioning sort of thing. I'm struck by how very often here in California, and I think this is the case in more places in California, the church's response in dealing with this issue is to point to the justice dimension of it. And the justice dimension of it is, look who's going to be euthanized. Look who's going to be pressured into euthanizing. Look what insurance companies will support and what insurance companies won't support. Subtext, doesn't that make you nervous? Doesn't that make you nervous? And someone might say in response, well, we're going to build in safeguard after safeguard after safeguard. And someone says to them, that's what they said in the Netherlands, and that's what they said in Belgium, and that's what they said in Canada. But now Canada is even discussing a bill that would allow for euthanasia for the mentally ill. So we've got euthanasia seen in the context of justice. And then I always want to think, let's go to the hardest of hard cases and see what we have to say there. And the hardest of the hard cases seems to me to be the person who cannot transcend because of suffering and pain and unconsciousness, cannot at this point transcend the suffering, cannot at this point transcend the pain if there is pain. And what do we say to ourselves if we fear being in that position? And we even can make the case harder. We can have the person who cannot accept our sense of solidarity because the person isn't aware of our sense of solidarity. Perhaps the most the person can say is something along the lines of, in one way or another, won't you please just leave me alone? And then I think, what do we say in that kind of case? And I think so much has to be said ahead of time. We as Christians here and now can offer all the suffering of the future that we will undergo. We can offer that now to be united with the suffering of Christ on the cross. And on the cross, we have Christ saying, my God, why have you abandoned me? So even Christ, as man, experiences this whole sense of abandonment. And he did so with his mother and perhaps his very best friend right there with him. And so at that point, we come to a certain ineluctable, intransigent mystery in life. And then I think what we have to say is we have to understand that there is this profound mystery in life, and we cannot always hope to somehow mitigate it or deal with it in a technological way. And we can be open to the mystery, or we can be closed to the mystery. And to say this in the secular context, as Mario was indicating, is extraordinarily difficult. And I suppose church leaders are understandably saying, let's play the justice card as much as we can, because as much as we can, that will enable us to, as Richard says, hold the line. So I guess we come square up against our limits, and Scripture tells us that death and what attends death is the last of our enemies. Well, I know that here and now, whatever our theological reflections are, we have to do the best we can. And I wonder, before we run out of time, if Richard, you could tell us what we need to know about legal strategies here and now that we can draw on while we're doing all our philosophical and theological thinking. Here and now, what can we do to safeguard human life?
Well, there's so much you've just said that's worth commenting on. Jim, let me just start at the back end. I think what you described the bishops in California as doing is the primary response we should have. That is to say, issues of justice. The way I think the best argument against physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia is that, look, the disabled and the old are already vulnerable and subject to great discrimination. People are not giving them their fair share. Why would we think they would be treated better if they're given a greater vulnerability? I mean, basically what the assisted suicide people say is, put a gun next to your bed along with a suicide note so you'll have freedom at all times. That's making you really vulnerable, not only to somebody who will put pressure on you to go ahead and use that gun. The suicide note is giving yourself permission, but it's to someone who will take the gun and shoot the person and then say, hey, they did it to them, lie and say, look, the suicide note proves that they did it themselves. So, I mean, it's because see, the way the law is set up is it takes there's a lot of red tape in getting permission to do assisted suicide. But once you've got that permission, you're given the deadly drugs, and there's no supervision when you take the deadly drugs. So it's like giving someone a gun and a suicide note and putting it next to the bed. That's tremendously imperiling these people. So what I would say is, before we take that step of putting these people in tremendous peril, let's work on the inequality. Let's work on the discrimination. Let's work on the injustice that is now that old and sick and disabled people are now subject to. If we can do something about that, if we can strengthen them, if there were some way to have not that this would be that easy to do, but some kind of a trade union of disabled people so they could fight back if one of them were euthanized. If we could put into place structures that would that would right now make sure that people have a free choice over much of their lives, despite their disabilities and their age and their infirmities, then maybe we could consider giving them a choice over their death as well. But to give them a choice over their deaths when they don't have a choice over their lives is obviously just asking for tremendous injustice and trouble. So I think that's the strongest argument that we have. And I think that's an argument which really appeals to the left. I would say in fighting against assisted suicide, we shouldn't talk about the sanctity of life, except in a few contexts. I mean, there's certain places we talked about before where the left is for the sanctity of life, mainly in the case of opposing the death penalty. I mean, if euthanasia ever becomes a right, forget about abolishing the death penalty. Lots of people somebody may say, I'd rather die than spend 10 years in prison. Even a minor prison sentence may become de facto a death sentence, because the person is going to say, okay, kill me now, because I don't want to go to prison and lose my wife. She's going to go off with somebody else while I'm in prison, So, it's going to reinstitute the death penalty. Well, the left is against the death penalty. So if you point out that by saying you can have euthanasia, assisted suicide to eliminate almost any kind of suffering, you're going to be reinstituting the death penalty. So anyway, what I would say is concentrate on those places where the left is standing up for the sanctity of life, or the left is standing up for equality, for human dignity, and focus on that, because the right, the conservatives, still have this sense of taboo, this sense of the sacrosanct nature of life, that one should never kill an innocent person for any reason as an absolute. So let's focus primarily on those arguments that appeal to the left.
Last thoughts, Christopher?
Well, it seems what you're suggesting then is that we're not going to be opposing euthanasia in principle, but we're just going to try to ameliorate its application.
No, I'm saying it's better to say we'll talk about whether or not we should oppose it. It should be in principle opposed after we've eliminated injustice and inequality. I don't know that can ever be done. Maybe it can never be done, and then that will mean we don't ever have euthanasia. If it can be done, then, because what I see, Nietzsche said years ago, and I think this is what is at work in the background. He wrote prophetically, really, to go on vegetating in cowardly dependence on physicians and machinations after the meaning of life, the very right to life, has been lost, that ought to prompt a profound contempt in society. And Ronald Dworkin, perhaps the leading legal thinker of the end of the 20th century, echoed Nietzsche, saying that we are distressed and even disapprove of someone who neglects or sacrifices the independence we think dignity requires. Someone who goes on an independent life has denied that his life is important for its own sake. In other words, persons are not ends in themselves anymore for Dworkin or for Nietzsche, but rather the good life is the only thing that is an end in itself. So this is, if we say that death is permissible, that's where we're heading, towards saying that people who don't take this easy way out are just cowardly. They deserve contempt. And I think that is something we don't want to have visited upon ourselves or those we love.
Thank you very much. As always, we end with the gospel for today. This is from Luke. While still more people gathered in the crowd, Jesus said to them, This generation is an evil generation. It seeks a sign. But no sign will be given to it except the sign of Jonah. Just as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. At the judgment, the Queen of the South will rise with the men of this generation, and she will condemn them because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And here is something greater than Solomon. At the judgment, the men of Nineveh will rise with this generation and condemn it, because at the preaching of Jonah, they repented. And there is something greater than Jonah here. The gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Again, thank you one and all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.